debaters. So it's going to be a tough one, but we want you to try and have a think just before we kick off today. Have a think about, what do you think on the motion? This House believes that fashion doesn't have a conscience. It will be the job of the proposition team to decide what that statement means. But when we say if someone has a conscience or not, what we need to think about is, do we think that person or that industry, in this case we're talking about the fashion industry, do we think that is a moral industry that runs its business in a moral way, or do we think they have ethical practices, or do we think that fashion maybe hasn't got too much of a moral conscience? Maybe it's too much focused on profit, or maybe it has quite damaging consequences, the way in which the fashion industry goes about its business. I'm not going to say too much more than that, because it will be down to our speakers to really define that, but it's about the practices of the fashion industry, and it's about what kind of ideals and ethics they promote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to vote in that poll. We've got 24 people have voted already, so we're going up. You can say that you're unsure, but at the end of the debate, I'm going to force you to make a decision after all our speakers have made their brilliant speeches. So a couple of housekeeping rules while you make those decisions. Firstly, so that you're aware, this is going to be recorded and uploaded onto the Eltham Hill class charts, so that people from across the Eltham Hill community can watch this afterwards. You should also be aware that we want you to participate, as well as voting now and voting at the end. There is a Q&A function which you can open up, and if you have got some questions, you can see some of you have already been posting those. So Alliance is kind of asking us why have people in Everyday Society cared about it for so long, for example. And I'm going to ask the final speakers to respond to those questions. So at any point in the debate, you can type your questions up, and our summary speakers will hopefully have an opportunity to respond. During the debate, we're going to have 3-minute speeches. I'm going to be timing those here. As you can see, I'm in school. And I will clap for the speakers when they have got about 30 seconds left. Speakers can also offer points of information where they can interrupt the other speakers, and they can accept or decline those. We've also got 2 extra special guests from outside the Eltham Hill world. On proposition, we have journalist Rosalind Jana. Is it Jana or Jana? Cool. So Rosalind is a fashion writer, so she works kind of in the fashion and culture world. She's also a poet and an author. She's written for Vogue, amongst many other kind of refinery, loads of other cultural magazines and so on. So she's going to give us her perspective on the fashion industry as someone who writes about it every single day. And then we have Kelvin as well, Kelvin Amin, who's joining us. He's a solicitor at Clifford Chance, which is a magic circle, one of the top law firms in the country. He works on international deals and knows a lot about kind of business and how business operates and runs. And he's going to be defending the fashion industry, which will be interesting to hear his perspectives. So if you have questions for those guys as well, please make sure you ask those. Okay, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to vote in that poll. It's great that we've got so many people attending today. 5 seconds left, and I will be telling you the results. Okay, so let's end that poll. Okay, so we can see there, those are the standings as we begin this debate. Do we agree with the statement? So we've got 24% of you are on proposition, so you agree fashion industry doesn't have a conscience. There's 30% of you think no, actually the fashion industry is ethical. And that's a lot of unsure here. There's a lot to play for our debaters, who are going to be trying to convince those people who aren't sure that they should go their way. Okay, so I'm now going to invite our first speaker in the debate. Let me make sure I've got the order correct. And that will be Nancy, who will be arguing for the motion that this House believes that the fashion industry doesn't have a conscience. Let's just make sure you are unmuted. Okay, great. So, Nancy, you've got 3 minutes on the clock to persuade our many watchers. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I'm the first speaker for Team Proposition. Our second speaker is Rosalind, and our summary speaker is May. We define conscience about fashion as an overall moral belief with action taken in helping society and the environment without the influence of profit or publicity. In recent years, we have observed a rise in fashion companies campaigning to become more ethical, but we have to question, why is change only happening now? Underhand behaviour, poor treatment of workers, and the release of harmful chemicals into the environment have been happening for years, since the 19th century, in fact. Changes have only been made recently due to the relevance of the issue in the media. H&M, Nike, and Gap are just a few of the brands that have come under fire. These large companies know that they will lose profit and create a bad name for themselves if they don't attempt to change, and at the root of it all is financial gain. This leads me on to my second issue, the term ethical. What does it even mean? Surely you would assume that it means these corporations are tackling the issue directly, but it's not so clear. In fact, it's so open to interpretation, it doesn't have a definition in the fashion industry. The only clear way to describe it was given by Forbes, not as bad as mainstream fashion. The key word there is mainstream, meaning the ideas regarded as normal or conventional. Unethical fashion is still regarded as the norm. It's not just the developing countries that suffer. In the Western world, we live as products of consumption. Unethical marketing means that some people place expensive material possessions before necessities due to this idea that the nicest clothing will give you the most euphoric life. Accepted?
You said a moral belief without any publicity gain. However, for big fashion brands such as Gap, H&M, publicity would be inevitable. Don't you think that that would make it unfair towards those fashion brands?
Our point is that they should have been doing it in the first place instead of only doing it now when they realise that it's due to public demand that change is being made. Many people believe that you need to prove your worth by having the most expensive outfits, and I bet you know people who put having a new handbag or pair of shoes before more important things. This is perpetuated by major fashion corporations, again with the root of it all being profit. Finally, if you are saying that the fashion industry is ethical, then you're masking the problems of many who are still struggling, taking away their voice. Thank you for listening.
Right, big virtual round of applause there for Nancy opening our debate. So I can see some of us are asking some questions. Keep those coming in. We're now going to turn over to the first speaker for the opposition, who is Lucia. Lucia, you are unmuted. You've got 3 minutes on the clock to persuade our audience. Go for it.
The mainstream definition of conscious is to be aware and responding to one's environment. Now, Nancy stated that if they were only doing it for the public gain, it would still be a public gain for themselves and for others, no matter their actual intention. Now, Nancy stated the impact on the environment. Actually, it might not be as bad as you think. The fashion industry is aware of its impacts and decisions, and therefore they create actions such as their daily decisions to be more ethical. First of all, they create what sells. Controversy sells. Trends sell. And trends are a key part of being conscious. They are conscious of what is going on in their environment and what is going on around them. Fashion is not as sustainable as we would like, but it's changing, hence making it a lot more conscious. Fashion Revolution, Earth Day 2019, they demanded that it's a climate breakdown. Burberry, Gap, H&M, Kering, Levi's, and Inditex, all of the brands which you stated, they signed and promised to cut 30% of their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Now, that sounds pretty ethical to me. Secondly, spider silk and leather from discarded grape skins are becoming are becoming a lot more popular in the fashion world. H&M is becoming a lot more conscious with their actual conscious collection using leather made from Pinatex. Mother Pearls with their No Frills collection, Allbirds with their shoe collection made from eucalyptus. The Vehas Fair Trade trainers, Well Threads and Outknown Levi's collaboration where they have 40% of cottonized hemp. Now, I believe that that proposition will probably bring up the example of Burberry spending of fashion. And yes, that is a problem. However, once they were brought out, and you may say that only because of the impact and only because of the backlash that they stopped. But that is a key part of society. That is a key part of the cycle of fashion and cycle of society. If we don't expect to be called out, and if we don't act on being called out, then are we actually ethical? It doesn't matter their intentions. It matters instead how they act upon it. And after having the backlash of burning their fashion, they collaborated with Elvis and Case, as they reused a lot of their leather that they would probably throw away. And now 68% of their cotton and 49% of their leather is sustainable. Gucci has a 10-year plan where they create a sustainable plan along with Livia Firth. And you may state that this is token, that this is just for publicity, that this is just for public gain. But yet again, why should their intentions matter? Consciousness is defined as being aware about your surroundings. And they are aware about their backlash. They are aware about what is going on. Furthermore, there's a social consciousness. Chime for Change by Gucci is a campaign that they did in 2013 for gender equality. In a Rome runway last year, the theme of freedom appeared in Gucci, including the woman's right to choose to have an abortion or not. As words, "my body, my choice" were on the back of jackets, and a picture of a uterus was on a flowy dress. Then again, this might also be just for public gain, but why should it matter if they're influencing media, influencing fashion change? And you may argue that fashion doesn't have a conscience, but if fashion didn't have a conscience, it would not have evolved as it did. Thank you.
Great, big round of applause there for Lucia, our second speaker from the opposition. Welcome to everyone who's joined us a little bit late. We're debating here that this house believes that fashion doesn't have a conscience. We're going to turn over now to our second speaker, who was our guest speaker, to continue the case for the proposition. Rosalind, I will hand you the floor. Let me just unmute you.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me. So, 7 years ago this April, a factory collapsed in Bangladesh. 1,134 people died and nearly 2,600 more were injured. Although workers in the factory had already raised concerns about the safety of the building, noticing cracks in the walls, these concerns were ignored. The building, known as Rana Plaza, produced and supplied clothes to at least 29 big Western brands. Labels from some of those brands, including Primark, Mango, and Benetton, were found among the rubble. Many of these brands took years to pay compensation to those who were badly injured or lost family members, if they agreed to pay at all. This example is a good one when we ask, what does it mean for fashion to have a conscience? What moral duties does this industry, worth approximately £2 trillion, owe, and to whom? At its broadest, we might say that a basic demonstration of fashion's conscience might come in the way the industry treats those who work for them. But by that measure, fashion has always failed. From the introduction of mechanized looms in the 19th century, which led to the first round of sweatshops that involved great exploitation of women and children, through to present-day factories often situated in developing countries in the global south, fashion has a long and disturbing history of exploitation. Even setting aside tragedies like Rana Plaza, few of these present-day factories pay adequate minimum wages. And despite numerous promises from brands to do better, many workers still face hazardous environments, harassment, and health problems as a result of working with dangerous chemicals or equipment, all for the sake of a cheap dress or a pair of trainers. It's not just people either. Fashion, as we all know and as has been mentioned, is terrible for the environment. One could give so many different examples, but let's just take water as one. Fashion is the second largest polluter of water globally. Clothes factories regularly pump waste into rivers. Some of them are dyed blue because of genes, others are red thanks to toxic chemicals. The growing of cotton has also been devastating. The Aral Sea, situated in Central Asia, was once the fourth largest lake in the world. Now, thanks to the water-guzzling properties of cotton plants, the lake has entirely dried up, doing irreparable damage to the communities who relied on it and those who fished in it. It takes 2,720 litres of water to make a single cheap cotton t-shirt, but the fashion industry still largely cares about cheapness in the here and now, rather than any actual future change of the planet. And it's also not just about the production of clothes. It is about how it affects everyone. We engage with fashion every day, it's all around us. But fashion does fail its consumers. It is a form of self-expression, sure, but it's also an ever-changing system which is designed to make us feel inadequate for how we look, how we dress, and what is already in our wardrobes. When the writer Oscar Wilde said fashion is a form of ugliness so intolerable we have to alter it every 6 months, he was only half joking. If we were happy with everything we owned, fashion would grind to a halt tomorrow. Instead, it comes up with endless tricks to keep us buying. Trends are deliberately designed to make us want what we don't yet have. Advertising aims to leave us dissatisfied. These images are ones that persuasively whisper, if only. If only I looked more like that, if only my body were different, if only I could afford that expensive coat, then I'd be happy. Things are changing, but these tricks are still used regularly, and they are not the tricks of an industry with conscience that cares about the satisfaction of its buyers, but one that will do anything to secure their custom, no matter how bad it makes them feel. And as a final point, things are changing, but that change is slow. And if you want a kind of perfect example of how heartless the industry still is, one only needs to look at the consequences of the current pandemic to see how hollow those sentiments of change ring true. Bangladesh is still the world's second largest exporter of garments. In the past few weeks, British brands alone have cancelled £2.5 billion of orders to factories there. Not only have these brands previously exploited, underpaid, and risked the lives of those workers in order to make their clothes, now, despite claims to the contrary, they're abandoning them entirely. If anything, it's a time where fashion's conscience is currently under a spotlight, but the results are still very dark.
Thank you. Okay, Kelvin, the gauntlet has very much been thrown down by the opposition. So I'm going to mute Rosalind. Kelvin is our second guest speaker today, and he's here to defend big business. Take it away, Kelvin.
So on team opposition, we would say that fashion doesn't hurt people. People hurt people. We should ask ourselves, is it the greed of developed societies or the brands that have employees and desperate customers to serve? Who are we going to blame in this debate, ladies and gentlemen? And it's up to you to decide. Do we blame the consumers who, year on year, every 6 months, as Rosalind told us, are desperate for new trends and are forcing these companies to take some of the actions she described? Or are we going to blame the fashion brands who have a responsibility to their employees, let's not forget, and also to their customers? In my speech, I'm going to talk about why I think the blame should be shifted towards the consumers rather than blaming the fashion brands themselves. But before that, some responses to some of the points we've already heard. So Nancy told us that companies are only changing because of recent scandals and public pressure. We would suggest that the evidence doesn't point to this, actually. There's evidence that they're actually changing out of a genuine sense of responsibility. Remember, every time these scandals happen, these scandals arise, and there is some public pressure, consumers still vote with their feet, right? The vast majority of them still choose cheap clothes over ethical consumption. So the fact that there is still change in the industry shows that those within the industry are willing to push for change, despite the fact that demand is still extremely high for cheap, fast fashion that is causing all the problems that Rosalind talked about. So we would suggest that within the fashion industry, there are some people with experience who have a conscience, who have the knowledge about the supply chains and are able to implement the changes that Lucia talked about. So for example, Mango, a high street store, is moving in the right direction. It's started a 45-piece collection, sustainable collection using recycled polyester and organic cotton. These are the sorts of genuine internal changes that we think is moving the fashion world in the right direction. So we don't think we think that yes, these companies sometimes change because of public pressure, but on the whole, they're changing because of a genuine concern about their impact on the environment. And like Lucia said, what does it matter even if they are, if we're moving in the right direction? Better some change than none. We think that is evidence of a conscience within that industry. So on to my main point. We've got to remember that the majority of consumers aren't rich. The millions of people that shop at H&M and Zara aren't wealthy. They can't afford some of the higher end clothes. They need affordable clothes, and the big fashion giants that we're talking about provide that for them, the H&Ms of the world. They've shown that they are more concerned about price over the ethical issues at play. If people then want these items, the companies simply wouldn't make them. It just wouldn't be profitable for them. We would suggest that it might be people's insatiable appetite that has no conscience, rather than these brands themselves. Now, Rosalind said that it was these companies that are exacerbating that problem. But actually, we would say that they are best positioned in order to communicate the goodness of ethical fashion to their consumers. Out of every group in society, we would suggest that it's H&M and Zara that are in the best position to let their consumers know about the pros of ethical fashion. What am I talking about? They can do things like in stores. If you walk into a Zara store, Zara might have an advertisement about ethical supply chains. They can encourage consumers towards more ethical consumption. We would suggest that if that is the case, we would rather paint these fashion brands as having a conscience. We've seen that they are willing to move in that direction. Zara, for example, has joined the ethical fashion trend by using recycled wool in some of its collections. This wasn't coming from the people that want a top for £10. This is coming from Zara themselves, letting their consumers know that there are alternatives to what they normally buy. Is the best way to educate their consumers. We think that these fashion brands are showing that they do have a conscience, and in a world where everyone is connected in an hour, we think the responsibilities, they have to be ethical. And we think that the trend that Lucia talked about in her speech is a positive thing. So we don't think that it's the fashion brands that don't have a conscience, it's people, and fashion brands are best placed to help them in the right direction. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kelvin. Virtual round of applause. I've been, as you can see, I've been joined here by Miss Park. It's gonna, we're live. So it's over to you now to ask some questions. Just a heads up for everyone who's attending this debate. Kelvin has to go off and fight some legal battles in a moment for his clients, so he might not be able to join us whole way through. So I'll just thank you now, Kelvin, for being able to join us if you have to leave.
Thank you, everyone. For opposition.
Yeah, my opposition. So I'm going to ask some of the questions that we've got here opened up. If you haven't typed a question yet, then please do so in the next few moments, and that will be our jobs, the job of Sia and May to answer those. So Alliance has asked, if fashion doesn't have a conscience, then why have people in everyday society cared about it so much and for so long? So it's kind of interesting links to some of Kelvin's points. So we've got one from Miss Carson for the opposition. Do you think it is ethical to encourage young consumers to spend their parents' hard-earned money on fast fashion trends? Ms. Parker, I might come to you for a question in a moment, if you can think of one. Put you on the spot. A question there from Angel. Are you from Vogue? Yes, Angel. Rosalind is from Vogue. She's written for them. Are companies really aware, this is from Kathy, are companies really aware of the environmental damage they are doing if they continue to use mass plastic packaging? It's a really kind of interesting question there about the environment. We have another question here for the proposition from Ms. Carlson. Is there any way to truly avoid all unethical decisions in an industry that survives off of public demand that encourages cheap, affordable products? Great. And then we have one question here from Temi, which is debating hard? Temi, I reckon the answer to that is probably yes, but I'll leave that to the summary speakers to respond to. Okay, if anyone else have any other questions, please type those in now. If not, then we will move forward. I'll give the summary speakers just a moment to think of some answers there. A reminder that when we wrap up today, I'm going to be running the same poll that I ran at the beginning. So you only have really 2 speeches left in which to make your decisions, because it won't be me that decides, it won't be Miss that decides who wins. It'll be by a public vote. So it's very important that you make your decisions. Okay, so in the debate, we often leave the final word to the proposition, because the proposition have the most difficult task of proposing something. So the speaker for the opposition will go first. And I believe that that is Sia, am I right? Yeah, okay, Sia, if you're ready, you're going to have 3 minutes on the clock to summarise the case for the fashion industry. Take it away.
So to first answer the floor questions, whether it is ethical to encourage young consumers to spend their parents' hard-earned money on fast fashion trends. However, it is also unethical to deny people how to spend their money anyways. And it is brands have a quota to meet to allow people to buy wherever they want from their stores and things like that. So also answer the other floor question, Zara actually uses cardboard packaging, and we also have Primark who don't use plastic bags, and they have paper bags instead for you to put your items in. So Nancy first spoke about Nike and what they do to the environment. However, Nike is extremely open-minded as in terms of their conscience, because we've seen that they've done many campaigns in response to, such as the one in 1995 where they promoted female empowerment, and they also they promoted this HIV positive athlete. They promote people that won't necessarily be the conventional people out there, and I feel like that is extremely open-minded and shows how aware they are, maybe not necessarily environmentally, but socially, as Lucia discussed. Lucia also discussed how brands have evolved massively, and massively on the environmental front as well, such as the alternative to spider silk. And brands also now have pledges such as Gap and H&M. They've acted on their conscience by pledging to reduce 30% of their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Rosalind discussed the consequences, and we acknowledge the consequences, and however, the motion is about fashion's conscience, not consequences, meaning that fashion acknowledges their ethical wrongdoings, and whether it's slow or fast, change is change regardless, and their open-mindedness is what we should really be focusing on, rather than the growth of that open-mindedness. Socially, brands now have ambassadors, advisory panels, and diversity officers in terms of how the models that they put out there, and how us young people view how we view fashion, and how we view the people showcasing the fashion. Kelvin discussed how we, the consumers, are incredibly separate from the fashion itself. We seem to feel like the fashion brands are the toxic ones, whereas we, the consumers, are the ones that are really pleading for more clothes, more shoes, more accessories. And it's unfortunate to see that we are the ones that are losing our conscience, and instead blaming fashion for losing its conscience and not having a conscience. The brands do care about the environment, and they've attempted a change. Regardless, a conscience is about acknowledging and being aware, and the opposition completely agrees that they have that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sia. Passionate speech to end the case there for the opposition. So you have one more speech to decide, and that speech is going to be made by May, who I am going to unmute. Okay, May, you are the final speaker in this lunchtime debate. You've got just about 3 minutes on the clock to bring everyone over to your side. Take it away.
Every year, the world as a whole consumes more than 80 billion items of clothing. It appears to me that Team Opposition are arguing that 40 billion of those or more were made ethically. Why? Because we do not label a whole industry as conscious and ethical when only a small percentage qualifies. By my first speaker, Nancy's definition, you are claiming that this industry cares for both its employees and our planet. By our definition, you are ignoring the millions of people who are abused by their own industry. You're ignoring the safety of millions. You're ignoring the children who are paid 15 cents an hour, less than half of the minimum wage. How can you label an industry that exploits our people and pollutes our planet as having a conscience and being ethical? There are also serious dangers to doing this too. We will be in denial, taking the right to speak out and campaign for better working conditions because some people promised us that this industry was ethical, that the disgraceful stats were not representative of a majority, that they were merely outliers. It's almost like you're suggesting that the hundreds, forget that, the 218 million children who are engaged in child labour do not exist at all. Lucia, you used the definition of conscious, which means having knowledge of something. But this debate is about the fashion industry having a conscience, which is a person's moral sense of right and wrong, viewed as acting as a guide to one's behaviour. We need evidence to call it ethical. Evidence that you don't have, because the emissions generating clothing for the average household is equivalent to driving a car 6,000 miles. 20 billion items of clothing are consumed per year, and that is just the United States of America. And let's not forget about the 218 million children. And to answer one of the floor questions, is there a way to really make the industry fully ethical? I think not employing children would be a good start, but the point still remains that it's not ethical now. Okay, Lucia, what you spoke about is not representative of a majority. This evolution is not representative of moral, it's driven by profit, and that is an undeniable fact. Kelvin, you said people hurt people. All of these people are parts of the industry, the workers, the customers. You all have an effect, and it's recognized and have recognized the unethical state of the industry. We buy cheap clothes because they are sold to us by the same industry you are defending. These companies employ children and choke our planet, Kelvin. Nancy discussed the recent trends not being representative of moral, more an attempt at securing profit in the new environmentally conscious customers. She questioned why the brands didn't always have these morals. Her question remained unanswered. And the state of our planet became news 30 years ago, so there is no reason why. Rosalind, my second speaker, discussed the tragedy of the Rana Plaza in 2013 and spoke of fashion's environmental and social moral to its customers and workers. The proposition is aware of the struggles that child labourers face every day. We are aware of the insane amounts of pollution created by the industry. We are aware. We don't deny those people their right to be heard. If you believe in the voices of these people, the safety of our planet, the rights to better working conditions, and the road to sustainable fashion, then you won't deny that there are faults in this system. And along with this, you will vote Team Proposition. Because ignoring the damage the fashion industry does is not only ignorant, willfully blind, and counterproductive, but also, that's not what justice looks like. Thank you.
Okay, big virtual round of applause there for May, our final speaker. Okay, so I'm going to pop the poll up. It is time for you to decide. Panelists, you are not allowed to vote. So this time I'm going to urge you to not go with unsure, make a decision. Do you think that the fashion industry has a conscience? Whilst you're voting, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Rosalind for coming and joining us. Really, really excellent to hear from an expert on the industry, and a really powerful speech as well. I'll just thank Kelvin as well in his absence for bringing us the case from the other side. I have a couple of questions for our attendees. Firstly is, do you want to speak in one of these debates? If you do, we have another speech another debate next Thursday lunchtime, which will be on renewable energy and if we should move to a 100% renewable energy grid. And we have one of the world's top debaters joining us for that, as well as a climate change expert. So if you didn't manage to speak this week, but you want to get involved like these guys in Year 10 have, let me know. Year 10s, the challenge for you is to write now your own version of this speech and to send it in to your teachers. So if we have any Year 10s watching, your challenge is to write your own version of the speech on this topic. You decide if you're going to go for or against, send that in, and the English team will give you some feedback. Okay, so we've got 10 seconds left on that poll if you've not already voted. Still some of you unsure, 5 of you couldn't make a decision. Right, let's end that poll there. Drum roll. And that's a pretty clear result for the proposition. Congratulations. Commiserations to our opposition team, but hopefully they'll come back stronger on another week. So thank you everyone for joining us. The fashion industry, I'm sure, will be fairly upset with that result. I'll make sure they find out what Eltham Hill has decided. And we look forward to seeing you next Thursday lunchtime for another one of these debates. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.